CEO abandoned his wife for a business partner. 2 years later, he finds her at the airport with a boy. Victor Sinclair had always believed that the key to happiness was success. As the CEO of one of the world's most influential tech companies, he had built an empire on that belief. His name synonymous with innovation, progress, and untold wealth. His office was a sleek monument to his achievements, surrounded by high-tech gadgets and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the sprawling city. To the outside world, Victor was living the dream. He had it all: power, respect, and the kind of fame that only a billionaire could command. But deep down, he knew something was missing. The truth was, while he had spent years building a company that would stand the test of time, he had neglected the one thing that truly mattered: his family. His wife, Clara, and their son, Max, had been the heart of his life once. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of them. He had been so obsessed with his vision for the future that he allowed the present to slip through his fingers. The memories of their life together haunted him now. Clara's laughter, the way Max had looked at him with awe and admiration when he was younger. But it was all gone now. They were no longer the family he had once known, no longer the pillars of his existence. The divorce had been a public spectacle, with all the messy details of their personal lives laid bare for the world to see. Clara had left him, taking Max with her, and despite his wealth, Victor felt the sting of abandonment more than any loss of fortune. 2 years had passed since he had seen them. 2 years of trying to bury his regrets in work, of pretending that his success could fill the void left by their absence. And yet, as he stepped off the jet bridge at Grandview International Airport that day, something stopped him in his tracks. He wasn't thinking about business. He wasn't thinking about the latest product launch or the quarterly earnings report. His mind, usually consumed by data and projections, was overwhelmed with something far more personal, far more real. It was them. Victor's eyes locked onto the familiar sight of Clara standing by the baggage claim, looking just as beautiful as she had the day they first met. Her golden hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and though she was dressed casually, she radiated a presence that made Victor's heart skip a beat. But it was Max that really knocked the breath from his chest. The boy, now almost a teenager, had grown into someone unrecognizable. No longer the little boy who clung to his side, Max now stood taller, his features sharper, his eyes more distant. He was no longer the boy Victor had known. He was someone new, someone who had spent years without him. Victor felt as if the floor beneath him had suddenly disappeared. His mind raced, but his body stood frozen in place, unable to move. Clara had yet to notice him. Max, too, was distracted by his phone, scrolling through some message with the same air of indifference that Victor had come to associate with teenagers. For a brief moment, Victor considered turning around, walking away without saying a word, slipping back into the life that had been all too comfortable without them. But something inside him, something raw and desperate, urged him to act. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, perhaps an apology, perhaps an opportunity to explain himself, but most of all, he just wanted to be near them again, to see them, to feel a part of their lives. "Clara," he called out, his voice hoarse but full of yearning. It was the first time he had said her name in months, and the sound of it almost startled him. Clara's head snapped toward him. Her eyes widened with recognition, but there was no joy in her expression, no warmth. It was as though her face had been trained to remain neutral, to guard the pain of their past. She blinked as if making sure she wasn't imagining him. "Victor," she said slowly, as though the name didn't quite fit on her tongue anymore. "What are you doing here?" Victor stepped closer, his heart pounding. "I didn't expect to see you," he admitted, trying to steady his breath. He was careful not to move too quickly, knowing that any sudden gesture would only push her further away. Clara's smile was tight, forced. "It's a big airport," she replied, her voice cool. "Anyone can be here." Max, now sensing the tension in the air, looked up from his phone. His eyes narrowed as he studied his father. Victor had no idea what to expect. Had Max been told about him, or was this the first time he was seeing his father in years? "Dad?" Max said, the words sounding strange in his mouth, like a foreign language he hadn't quite learned to speak. He stood there, his hands jammed in his hoodie pockets, his posture defensive. "What are you doing here?" he asked, echoing Clara's words, but with a hint of confusion. Victor swallowed hard. He began. But the words got stuck in his throat. He couldn't just throw out some rehearsed apology or explanation. How could he? How could he explain the years of silence, the mistakes, the selfishness that had driven them apart? Clara's gaze flickered from Victor to Max, and then back to him. It was as if she had already prepared herself for this moment. She stepped closer, her expression more serious now, and Victor couldn't help but notice the slight tremble in her voice when she spoke again. "You think you can just show up after 2 years, Victor?" Clara's words cut through the air like a knife. "After everything that happened? After how you treated us?" Max turned away, unwilling to engage in this conversation, but Victor could see the way his shoulders hunched, the way his jaw clenched. The boy was hurting, just like his mother. "I know I messed up," Victor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I let you both down, but You think an apology is going to fix everything?" Clara interrupted, her voice rising now. "You think after everything you put us through, you can just walk back in like nothing happened? Max doesn't even know who you are anymore." The weight of her words struck him like a punch. He had always known that the distance between him and his family had grown, but hearing it from Clara's lips, hearing it in the form of a declaration, "Max doesn't even know who you are anymore," shattered him. Max's eyes met his for the first time, and in that look, Victor saw a mirror of the boy he had once been. A boy who had once trusted, once loved, once believed in his father without question. But now, the boy who stood before him was distant, wary, and disillusioned. The boy who had learned to live without him. Victor took a step forward, reaching out. "Max, But before he could finish, a voice interrupted, one that sent a shiver down his spine. "Clara, Max, everything okay here?" Victor turned to see a man walking toward them, his arm casually draped around Clara's shoulders. The sight of him stopped Victor cold. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident stride that spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin. But it wasn't just his appearance that left Victor stunned. It was the way he held himself, the way he stood so close to Clara, as though he belonged in her life now. Victor's chest tightened. The man, clearly someone important to Clara and Max, extended his hand toward Victor, offering a greeting. "I'm Jonas," he said, his voice smooth and welcoming, but there was an edge to his gaze as he looked at Victor. "I take it you're the estranged husband?" Victor's heart dropped. He could feel the weight of the situation shifting. This wasn't just a reunion. This wasn't just about mending old wounds. This was about confronting a reality that he had tried to avoid for too long. Clara stepped back, her expression unreadable. "Jonas is part of Max's life now, Victor," she said quietly. "He's been there for us when you couldn't be." The words hit Victor like a punch. He felt a burning shame rise in his chest, a mixture of regret and guilt. Jonas. He was everything Victor was not. He had been there, present, steady, something Victor had failed to be. Victor forced himself to speak, though every word felt like it was being torn from him. I didn't know," he muttered, feeling the bitter taste of humiliation. "I didn't know." But Jonas's eyes softened, and with a brief nod, he let go of the tension in the air. "I'm not here to make this harder, Victor. I just want what's best for Clara and Max." Clara's gaze softened for a moment, but she didn't say anything. Max, however, shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know if we can fix this, Dad," Max said quietly, his voice betraying the inner conflict he felt. "But maybe, just maybe, we can start over." Victor stared at his son, heartbroken and hopeful all at once. This was only the beginning, but at least it was a beginning. Victor Sinclair had hoped that the unexpected reunion with Clara and Max was the first step toward healing, a chance to rebuild the family he had so thoughtlessly abandoned. But as he walked back to his luxury sedan after the chance encounter at Grandview International, a sense of unease began to gnaw at him. The truth was, the road to reconciliation was never going to be as simple as a single meeting. Clara's icy demeanor, Max's guarded attitude, and the presence of Jonas, Max's father figure, had made that clear. Yet, it was not just the personal complications that weighed on him now. It was the larger, more dangerous forces that still loomed in his life. Victor had built his success on a foundation of cutting-edge technology, innovative products, and the relentless pursuit of progress. But the business world wasn't kind to the weak. And there was one person who had never forgiven him for stepping away from the very empire they had built together: Lorraine Pierce. Lorraine had been his closest confidant and business partner for years. Tall, strikingly beautiful, and sharp as a tack, Lorraine was a woman who never let emotions interfere with her ambition. In her early 40s, she had the kind of presence that demanded attention. With raven black hair that framed her angular face and a body that still turned heads despite her corporate attire, Lorraine embodied power in every sense of the word. To the public, she was the perfect embodiment of grace and authority, a businesswoman who had clawed her way to the top. But to Victor, she had always been something more sinister. Lorraine had been the mastermind behind many of their company's most successful ventures. She had been the one with the sharp mind for strategy, the one who pushed Victor to go further, to climb higher. She had been indispensable until she hadn't been. Their professional partnership had fractured in spectacular fashion when Victor had made the decision to step back from the CEO role to focus on his personal life. At the time, Lorraine had supported his decision, but underneath her calm exterior, resentment had been brewing. She had always wanted more control, more recognition, more power, and Victor's departure had given her the perfect opportunity to seize what she believed was rightfully hers. What Victor hadn't known, what he could never have predicted, was that Lorraine had never truly accepted his choice to walk away. She had always seen herself as the real mastermind behind their success, and with him out of the picture, she believed she had the right to claim what was hers. But even more dangerous than that, Lorraine had never been one to tolerate weakness. And in her eyes, Victor had shown weakness by neglecting his family and stepping down. Now, as he prepared to take the first steps toward reconciliation, he was about to discover just how far Lorraine would go to ensure he stayed out of the picture. It started with an unexpected call. Victor had just returned to his sleek penthouse apartment, a minimalist space filled with high-end technology, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city lights, when his phone buzzed. The number on the screen made his stomach drop. It was Lorraine. Her voice, when it came through the receiver, was a calm but forceful whisper. "I see you're back in town, Victor, and I see you've decided to reconnect with your family." Victor's pulse quickened. He had no idea how Lorraine had found out about his encounter at the airport, but he knew that nothing with her was ever a coincidence. She had eyes and ears everywhere. "I'm not interested in whatever you're planning, Lorraine," Victor said, his voice tight, trying to mask the irritation rising inside him. "This is between me and my family." Lorraine laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Oh, I think you'll find it's more complicated than that. You see, Victor, I have a very public way of dealing with things, and I think your little reunion with Clara and Max deserves to be exposed to the world." Victor froze, the blood draining from his face. He had learned long ago that Lorraine was not a woman who made idle threats. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth, Victor," Lorraine said, her voice now laced with venom. "About how you abandoned them. How you neglected your family for years while you built your shiny little empire. I think the world deserves to know exactly what kind of man you are." Victor's heart began to race. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would, and I will," she replied coldly. "It's time for everyone to see who the real Victor Sinclair is. I think your precious Clara will be especially thrilled to find out about your little flings during your marriage. And as for Max, well, it might be hard for him to trust you when he finds out what kind of man his father really is. Don't think I've forgotten about the business deals you've been involved in, the ones you conveniently forgot to mention to her when you promised to be a good husband. No, Victor, I'll make sure the world knows everything." Victor's hands clenched into fists. He had been through hell in the business world, faced media storms, betrayals, and personal attacks. But the thought of his family's private life being dragged into the public eye, especially Clara and Max, made him sick to his stomach. "You're crossing a line, Lorraine," Victor growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Am I?" Lorraine responded with a smooth, calculating tone. "You know how the game works. You don't get to walk away from this, not without paying the price." The line went dead. Victor stood there, his phone still pressed to his ear, unable to shake the feeling of dread creeping up his spine. Victor knew what he had to do, but it wasn't going to be easy. In the days that followed, Lorraine's plan began to unfold in the most spectacularly public way possible. A well-timed leak to the media exposed private details of Victor's marriage to Clara, details no one had known before. Photos of Clara looking distraught in a meeting with her nonprofit team were paired with headlines accusing her of financial mismanagement. Worse still, rumors about Victor's involvement in shady business deals began to surface, allegations he had long buried in order to protect the integrity of his company. The world, hungry for scandal, ate it all up. The media spun the story into something more than it was, a tale of betrayal, dishonesty, and a family destroyed by greed. The once untouchable Victor Sinclair's reputation was being shredded right before his eyes. But the most devastating twist came when Clara's nonprofit was forced to respond to the accusations of embezzlement, and the public took sides. The donors pulled out. The board members began to distance themselves. Clara's reputation, already under siege, was now at risk of being completely ruined. Victor had to face the ugly truth. Lorraine hadn't just gone after him. She had gone after the one thing that had truly mattered to him, the thing that had always been his last remaining tether to a life worth living, his family. But what he hadn't counted on was Clara's strength. Days after the story broke, Victor found himself outside Clara's apartment, standing in the pouring rain, heart racing. He had come to apologize, to explain, to try to salvage whatever shred of connection remained between them. But when the door opened, it wasn't Clara who stood there. It was Jonas. "I'm not sure what you're hoping for, Victor," Jonas said, his expression guarded. He was a tall man in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and intense blue eyes. He exuded quiet authority, and in the past few years, he had become someone Clara and Max could depend on. He wasn't just a father figure. He was a steady hand, a protector. Victor took a step forward, but Jonas didn't budge. "I'm here to tell you something," Jonas said, his voice calm but firm. "Clara and Max don't need your apology. They need you to stay out of their lives. You've already caused enough damage. If you want to fix anything, if you really care about them, you need to deal with Lorraine first." Victor clenched his jaw. "I'm not running away, Jonas. Not anymore." Jonas's eyes softened, but there was no sympathy in his gaze. "You're too late, Victor. Your chance has passed. But if you care at all, you'll find a way to stop Lorraine. That's the only thing that matters now." And with that, the door shut in his face. Victor was left standing in the rain, his heart heavy with the weight of his failures. He knew what he had to do, but as the storm raged around him, it became clear. His battle for redemption had only just begun. Victor sat alone in the dim glow of his penthouse, his head in his hands. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within him. Rain streaked down the glass walls, the rhythmic patter a counterpoint to the chaos in his mind. His company's reputation lay in tatters. Clara's nonprofit was on the brink of collapse, and Max, his son, his flesh and blood, was being dragged into the public eye in ways he had never wanted. The headlines were unrelenting. The latest one blared across his tablet screen. "Sinclair family scandal. Deepens, nonprofit under investigation, estranged wife speaks out." But Clara hadn't spoken to the media. He knew this was Lorraine's handiwork. Victor closed his eyes and pictured Max's face, the way his eyes had flickered with something akin to recognition at the airport, the way he had clutched his mother's hand protectively. He thought of Clara, her hazel eyes filled with a mixture of fury and hurt. The memory of her words stung. Why should this time be any different? It wasn't just about saving his company or even clearing his name. For the first time in years, Victor realized he wanted something more. He wanted his family back. But wanting wasn't enough. He had to act. Victor's first step was to assess the damage. He called his longtime friend and lawyer, Julian Marks, for an emergency meeting. Julian, a grizzled man in his late 50s with a perpetually furrowed brow and a knack for cutting through nonsense, arrived at Victor's penthouse late that night. "Lorraine's out for blood," Julian said, setting his briefcase down with a thud. "She's orchestrated this masterfully. Every leak, every headline, she's controlling the narrative." Victor nodded. "She's going after Clara now. Dragging her nonprofit into this was a calculated move. Lorraine knows that destroying Clara destroys me." Julian sighed, rubbing his temples. "The board is meeting tomorrow. They're considering a vote to remove you as chairman. Lorraine's pushing for it." Victor leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "Let her have it." Julian looked up, startled. "What are you talking about?" Victor's voice was calm but resolute. "I'm stepping down. Voluntarily." Julian stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Victor, you built this company from the ground up. You can't just walk away." "I'm not walking away," Victor said firmly. "I'm choosing a different fight. Lorraine wants the company? Fine. Let her have it. I'm going to focus on what really matters: Clara, Max, and undoing the damage Lorraine has done to their lives." The next morning, Victor stood in the boardroom of Sinclair Innovations, his presence commanding despite the tension in the air. Lorraine was seated at the far end of the table, her sharp green eyes watching him like a hawk. At 9 a.m. sharp, the board members filed in, the air thick with anticipation. Lorraine, dressed in a pristine white suit that contrasted sharply with her cold demeanor, had already begun her campaign to oust Victor. But Victor had other plans. He stood and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming. I know there's been a lot of speculation about my future with Sinclair Innovations. Let me put the rumors to rest. I am stepping down as chairman and CEO, effective immediately." The room erupted in murmurs of shock. Even Lorraine seemed momentarily taken aback. Victor raised a hand to silence them. "This decision isn't one I've made lightly, but recent events have made it clear that my priorities need to change. For too long, I've neglected the people who matter most to me. It's time for me to make amends and focus on rebuilding my family." Lorraine's lips curled into a smile. "A noble sentiment, Victor. But what about the company? What about your responsibilities to the shareholders?" Victor met her gaze without flinching. The company is in capable hands. I'll be transferring my shares to Hope Horizons, Clara Bennett's nonprofit organization. This will not only ensure the company's continued success, but also provide much-needed resources for mental health initiatives. The murmurs grew louder and Lorraine's smile faltered. I've also authorized an independent audit of Sinclair Innovations to ensure full transparency, Victor continued. I have nothing to hide, and I won't allow anyone to weaponize this company against me or my family. Lorraine's face darkened. She had underestimated Victor's resolve. The press conference that followed was nothing short of explosive. Victor stood before a sea of cameras, his tailored suit immaculate, his voice steady. He addressed the allegations, the company's future, and his decision to step down. But it was his closing remarks that captured the nation's attention. For years, I prioritized success over everything else, Victor admitted. And in doing so, I lost sight of what truly matters, my family. This isn't about damage control or public relations. This is about taking responsibility for my mistakes and doing everything in my power to make things right. The audience erupted in applause. The headlines that followed were surprisingly sympathetic. Victor Sinclair, from tech titan to family man. Victor's bold move shifted public sentiment, but it didn't neutralize Lorraine. She was furious, and her retaliation was swift. A new wave of articles surfaced, accusing Clara of accepting tainted donations from Sinclair Innovations. Victor, however, was ready. With Julian's help, he filed a lawsuit against Lorraine, accusing her of embezzlement and defamation. The lawsuit brought to light the evidence he had uncovered about Lorraine's financial misconduct, turning the tide against her. But Lorraine wasn't the type to back down. She escalated her attacks, threatening to reveal deeply personal secrets about Victor and Clara's marriage. Victor knew he was walking a tightrope. One misstep could ruin everything, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his reputation, he was fighting for his family. That evening, Victor arrived at Clara's home. He hadn't told her about his decision to step down or his plans to transfer his shares. He wanted her to hear it from him directly. Clara opened the door, her expression wary. Jonas stood behind her, his arms crossed. I heard about the press conference, Clara said, her voice neutral. What are you playing at, Victor? No games, Victor said softly. I meant every word. He explained his decision, watching as Clara's guarded expression slowly began to soften. I don't expect you to forgive me, Victor said, but I'm trying to make things right. For you, for Max. Jonas, ever the protector, spoke up. Words are easy, Victor. Prove it. Victor nodded. I will, but I need your help. Clara studied him for a long moment before finally saying, if you're serious about this, Victor, then you'll need to do more than just fight Lorraine. You'll need to show Max that he can trust you again. That's the only thing that matters to me. Victor's voice was steady. I'll do whatever it takes. Victor Sinclair's public resignation sent shockwaves through the city, but for him, it marked the start of a deeply personal journey. Redemption wasn't about grand gestures. It was about rebuilding trust with Clara, his son, Max, and even himself. Victor began volunteering at Hope Horizons, Clara's nonprofit. On his first day, he joined an art therapy session where Max, now 10, eyed him skeptically. What are you doing here? Max asked bluntly. Victor smiled. Trying to help. Think you can teach me how to paint? Max shrugged. You'll probably mess it up. By the end of the session, Max allowed Victor to help clean up brushes. It wasn't much, but to Victor, it was a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, Clara's nonprofit was crumbling under Lorraine Pierce's smear campaign. One evening, Victor found Clara overwhelmed, her desk buried in legal documents. She's destroying everything I've worked for, Clara said, her voice breaking. Victor's jaw tightened. I have evidence of Lorraine's corruption. I'll expose her and clear your name. Clara looked at him skeptically. This isn't just about fighting her, Victor. You need to prove to Max and to me that you've truly changed. Jonas, Clara's steady and protective partner, wasn't quick to trust Victor. If you want to be part of Max's life, you need to show up every single day, Jonas said. No excuses, no shortcuts. Victor nodded. I understand, and I appreciate everything you've done for him. Jonas remained wary, but acknowledged Victor's sincerity. Lorraine launched her next attack, accusing Clara of financial misconduct at Hope Horizons. The forged evidence created chaos, and donors began pulling their support. Furious, Victor confronted Lorraine. You've crossed the line, he said coldly. Lorraine smirked. This is business, Victor. You're just collateral damage. Her words only strengthened his resolve. Despite the chaos, Victor's efforts began to pay off. He provided evidence of Lorraine's corruption to a trusted journalist, planting the seeds of her eventual downfall. At home, his persistence started breaking through Max's defenses. One evening, as they worked on a puzzle, Max said, "Maybe you can come to my soccer game, if you want." Victor smiled. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Redemption was far from complete, but for the first time, Victor felt the path forward wasn't impossible. Victor Sinclair stood on the sidelines of Max's soccer game, his heart pounding as his son darted across the field. When Max scored the winning goal, Victor's cheers were the loudest. As Max ran up to him, grinning, he said softly, "Thanks, Dad." The single word filled Victor with a sense of pride and hope he hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, Victor joined Clara and Jonas for dinner at their home. Conversation turned to Hope Horizons, which was beginning to recover from Lorraine's smear campaign. David Grayson's expose is set to publish next week, Clara said. It could mean a fresh start for us. Victor nodded. You've been incredible, Clara. I'm lucky to be part of this. After dinner, Victor and Jonas talked outside. Jonas, always protective, acknowledged Victor's efforts. You're proving me wrong, he admitted, shaking Victor's hand. The following week, David's article exposing Lorraine's corruption went public, dismantling her influence and clearing Victor's name. But Victor focused on what truly mattered, spending time with Max and helping Hope Horizons. One afternoon, as Victor and Max sat by a lake, Max asked, "Do you miss being in charge of Sinclair Innovations?" Victor smiled. "Sometimes, but spending time with you and helping people feels more important now." Later, Clara stood with Victor on her porch. "We're not there yet, but we're closer," she said, squeezing his hand briefly. As Victor looked at the stars that evening, he felt ready for whatever came next. It wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of redemption.